Hey everyone, long time no talk to. So, I'm gonna do this video as a video. It's a little late because Halloween was last weekend, but there's no part of the year that it's not okay to be creepy and spooky. So, mind you, keep in consideration my washer is going in the background, and my kids may need to come downstairs for some reason or another if they need me. So, since that's out of the way, I actually have 4 scary stories to tell you that's been passed on to me over the years. I'll let you know who I heard them from. I'll give you kind of a breakdown of what each story is, and I'll explain to you why I decided in the end to do these stories. So, as everyone knows, it's been a very long time since I last posted, and last time I was on a schedule to do videos on Wednesdays and on Saturdays. So, as my commissions and other artwork and jobs are starting to dwindle down, I figure I can actually pick up and start doing my videos again. So, for any of you that are subscribed to me, say hooray, because I'll probably be back more consecutively now. So, the first story I'm going to tell is a story that was told to me by my late grandfather. And he told me of a time when he was growing up. There's a graveyard on the same street that he lived on. And when people around any time at night, it wasn't specifically a time of year, you could just happen to any night that you're walking down the street. But anyway, these two guys were leaving the local area fish plant after their work night was over, and they could hear a baby crying. Now, when this baby was crying, they heard the sound coming from the direction of the graveyard, because the graveyard is at the top of the hill right from where the fish plant is. So, fearing for the worst, they decided that they were going to try to figure out what it is that was causing the ungodly sound. So the two men went up into the graveyard and searched everywhere. There was nothing in the graveyard on the surface that would have caused them to think anything otherwise. So the next thing that they feared was, oh my god, this child had been buried alive. We need to find it. So, not really seeing any place or any specific grave or any new ground that would have been dug up, basically they found a area where they could hear the sound, but there was no fresh ground. It was just coming, the sound was coming from inside the ground. So they're like, oh crap. So the only thing that they could have done was they started digging this spot up because they could hear this child screeching and screeching and screeching and screeching. So basically, they kept digging and digging and digging. And one of the things that they noticed was that as they were digging, the ground was going back into the earth as quick as they were trying to dig it out. So as they were digging all the dirt up, and of course they didn't have any tools with them, so they're digging it up with their hands. So as soon as they were digging the ground up, the ground was falling back in the hole. So they continued to do this for a little while, and the sound did not stop. So as the sound continued and continued and continued, they started getting really worked up and scared because they didn't know how long they had to get this child out if it was buried alive. So where they didn't have any tools or anything like that, there was nothing that they could do. So they went to the local house nearby and asked to borrow a couple shovels. When doing so, the person was a little leery because they had told him that they were going to dig up a sound in the graveyard, likely so. But they continued to try to dig it up with the shovel, and again, the dirt would just go back in further and further and further, and they couldn't figure it out. But one of the men carried a Bible on them. So the man took the Bible out and put the Bible down in the middle of the spot where they were digging. And then they continued to dig around the Bible. Once they started doing that, they found that the ground wasn't falling back in the hole, and they could actually get somewhere with the ground being dug up. So eventually they got somewhere and they managed to get to the box that they were trying to get because thinking it was this child. Now, upon taking it out, they noticed that the size of the box was about the size of a shoe box, if not a little bit bigger. And they could still hear this godly screeching coming from inside the box. So as soon as they opened the box, that was it. The sound stopped. But they didn't find any bones or anything like that that you would have expected. All they found inside of the box was a black wing. And not just two, but one, just a single black wing. So, having the shit scared out of them, likely, they threw the box back in the ground, and the man picked up his Bible, and they ran for their lives. So, I don't know much more of what goes on with that story afterwards, because, like I said, it was a story that was told to me when I was a kid by my late grandfather, and he would tell us this a few times through my younger years. And it wasn't just me, it was some of the other kids that were involved within the community. So, yeah. The second story I will tell on this video comes from my grandmother. She's still around and stuff like this, but this is about her family in direct. So, in the video, I'll explain to you what it is exactly happened with her family. So what had happened was that when she was about 13 or 14, around that age, she was gone to go visit one of her aunts. And when she had went to go visit her aunt was one of the ones that unfortunately followed through with the customs of that time and had a very large family. So her aunt had about 13 kids. And so they're all ranged from different ages, from infancy to teens. And when my grandmother had went to go visit her aunt, she found it kind of strange that when she had went to go visit, that none of the 13 kids were around whatsoever. So when her aunt was asked about this, she was told, "Oh, they're at camp, they're at their friend's place." Even when asking about the babies or like the infant children and toddlers, she's like, "Oh no, they're with our other relatives, no worries, no, don't need to worry about them." But a lot of people in her family had noticed that her aunt's mind was going for a little while before this. Plus, her aunt's husband was always out to sea because we lived in a fishing community. So basically what had happened was that at one point in time during this visit, my grandmother had felt a very weird breath go across the back of her neck. And she, of course, was 13, so she didn't think anything of it. Whatever, right? So she was like, she's like, "Oh, there must be a window open or something like that, and then that must be the reason why we're getting a draft." So that was fine. So, in turn, basically, what had happened was that it happened the second time. After realizing that, my grandmother realized that there is currently no windows in the house open. So, in turn, what did my grandmother do? She's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna have a smoke." So, that's fine. So, my grandmother went outside and she's lighting up her smoke and stuff like that and just kind of sitting there, mind her business. And then all of a sudden, she can see a glow through the backyard. And she's like, "Well, what's glowing in the backyard? I didn't think they had a backyard light." So, as she continues to smoke, she goes towards the backyard. And when she turns the corner, all of a sudden, she's met with this apparition of a wooden cross and the heads of the 13 children on this cross with this apparition. Scared shitless, my grandmother put out her smoke, went in the house to tell her aunt, "Yeah, I'm gonna head home now, I'm not feeling well." Went and told her mother, and later come to find out down the road, I guess her aunt had murdered all the children. All the bodies were found. And her aunt was taken to jail because I guess what had happened was that she had finally snapped, and that's what had happened. So yeah, that's a story my grandmother told me when I would say, in my early teens, because I had asked for a scary story, of course. So that's what she had told me. So the last one that I'll tell you is not as long, so that's where I'll tell you this one before I move on to the last one, which is actually a personal account that I've went through. So the third one comes from a late uncle of mine who used to live right down by the shore, right down by the water where they all lived on this road. So basically, what had happened was that when they had, sorry, I'm catching my, I'm remembering things. So when they were looking out the picture window, he used to sit at the picture window and drink his tea and look out the window. And from his picture window, he could see down on the beach, he could see this very large granite rock. So there was a few nights during the year that, and again, he didn't specify a certain time of year, but a few nights during the year that he could actually see this weird light walking towards the granite rock. And he had a set of binoculars, so he picked up the binoculars and took a gander. And when he did, he seen that all he could see was it looked like a skeletal hand holding a lantern as it was walking across the beach to this granite rock. But when it got to the granite rock, it stopped. There is no more light, there is nothing there, it just stopped. So being curious and maybe thinking that, he kind of, was too tired or whatever like that, he went to bed. So the next day, just because he was curious, he decided to go down to the beach and check the beach because it wasn't part of the beach where the water could come up onto, so it's not like the footprints or something like that would have got washed away. So he went down and there was no sign of anything. There was no footprints. There was nothing to identify that anything had been there. And he even walked straight over to where the big granite rock was. And there wasn't anything there. There wasn't any markings on the granite rock. There wasn't anything to identify that even anyone had gone down with a car and tried to create a prank. There was nothing. So that was it for that. So that was a story that was told to me by my late great uncle. So the last story had actually happened to me when I was growing up. So I used to go visit my dad every 2 weeks, and I had gained a friend when I was about 11 or 12. And so basically there was one night that I had decided to stay at their house, but before that, basically what led up to this is a lot of different little things, but I never thought anything of it because of course I'm 12 to 13, or I'm 11 to 12 years old. I don't really know much about anything. So walking into this person's house always gave me the heebie-jeebies regardless. But her mom was also really different too. And my friend was about 9. So she was a couple years younger than me. So the house itself actually still stands in Halifax that I'm talking about. But yeah, anyway, so her mom always had this thing about telling us never to go into the basement and never to go into the room at the top of the stairs at the back of the house to the right. So we kind of stayed away from it. But kids at that age being told not to do something, we still do it anyway. So one of the times when she was outside in the garden and whatever like that, and so we were pretty much still in earshot with her, but she couldn't see us, we decided to take a trip down into the basement. So in terms of doing this, it didn't last very long because when both of us were down there, I got an overwhelming sense of dread. And when I got the overwhelming sense of dread, I then could also hear like a heavy breathing, but it was obvious that there was no one else in the house with us because it was just me, her, and her mom. Her dad was at work. So anyway, that was fine. That caused us to rush upstairs and close the basement door really quickly and, whatever. There was another time when I was sitting at the table with her mom and the basement door was completely closed and we were talking about something or another. And there was no windows open or anything like that, so there couldn't have simulated a draft, but then the basement door just kind of opened up on its own. And this is a really old house, so normally doors like that don't open on their own unless you actually twist the doorknob. So things like that happen. And then one night, she was like, hey, do you want to come for a sleepover? And I was like, sure. So I ended up sleeping in the bottom bunk, which is fine, but the way the house is positioned is that the bathroom is at the top of the stairs right across the hall, and her bedroom was directly to the right. So technically, the walls to the bathroom and her bedroom would have been connected. So that was fine. So we're like, doing everything little girls would do at a sleepover, didn't want to go to sleep and whatever like that. But we finally fell asleep, and then all of a sudden at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm being woken up to hearing thump, 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 thump right against the wall where I'm currently at. So, of course, this woke me up, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I got up and I went to the bathroom, and I didn't see anything, and I was like, all right, maybe it's the pipes. So I used the bathroom and I left, and I went back to bed. Until about an hour later, I was awoken again, and I was hearing the banging and stuff like that. So, in turn, I woke her up, and I was like, why do I hear a bunch of banging? And she then looks at me and says, "Oh, don't worry about it. That's the little boy that lives in the house." And I was like, what do you mean about the little boy that lives in the house?" So that was fine. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, of course. She could, because apparently it's something that she normally deals with. So the next day I had went to her mother and I was like, listen, I was woken up by all this banging and I'd like to know what it is, because she had told me it's nothing but the little boy that lives here. So I'm a little freaked out. Even being 11, 12, I want to know what's going on. So a little concerned to try to tell me. She then goes on to tell me that I guess there was this grandmother who had custody of her grandson. He was probably about 7 or 8. Her grandson's parents had passed away in a car accident, so she ended up getting custody of him. As the years went on, basically she ended up being immobilized and having to use a wheelchair. So when he was about 8 or 9, basically what had happened was that he was in the bathroom bathing, and she had then come in and started to drown the boy. But the boy had sat there and beat it on the side of the tub in order to try to get someone's attention. Obviously, there's no one else in the house, but that's what he was trying to do at that time, was to try to get someone's attention to try to get his grandmother to stop from drowning him. So that in turn is what found out to happen at the house. So I was a little freaked out at the time, and that's fine and dandy and said as is, because, stuff like that could happen to anybody. But even after that, you could even hear like wheelchairs going across the floorboards because it was an old hardwood floor or things like that. So it came down to being a very creepy situation, but as the time went on, I got used to it anyway. So, as I said, I would tell you the stories, who they were from, and why I decided to do this. Because, again, there's a lot of crap going on in the world, and who doesn't like to hear spooky stories? It doesn't have to be just around Halloween. And like I said, I have alleviated some of my schedule a little bit, and I figured it was a good time to actually do a video. So I really hope you guys like this. Give me a comment below. I actually wrote 3 of these stories on my Vocal account. If you don't know what a Vocal is, a Vocal is a place where people can write stories, and people can go online and read them. It's like a platform full of short stories on many different topics. I'll link my direct write-ups in the description. So then that way, if you guys do want to read through the stories again, you can. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for sitting with me again for my next Mummy Needs a Minute. Been great coming back, and you guys will be seeing me more often. Thank you.